Now, changing pace, a subject that is kind of recurring, I guess, in the New Zealand political space, popped up again a few weeks ago when a bill in the name of Green MP Golriz Garaman was pulled from the biscuit tin. And if passed, it will see the voting age lowered to 16. It will give prisoners the right to vote and enforce increased transparency for political party donations. The government responded just days later by announcing another democracy working group to review electoral law. Yesterday, we did invite MP Golriz Garaman to discuss her bill with Sean Plunkett. Unfortunately, her staff member told us that she would not be talking to the platform, and poor Ben got hung up on. So that's a shame. But someone who holds the opposite view to the Green Party on this, and I suspect some other things, and who is not afraid of independent media, is Liam Hehir. And he is here to tell us why the voting age should not be lowered. Welcome to the platform, Liam.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Oh, reasonable. Being up here in my house with my kids who have COVID and running out of coffee.
Oh no. And you've got lots of little ones. Are they all miserable or are they all right?
The third oldest, or second youngest, he's got it pretty bad. So a bit like the home with all the vomit and everything like that. But we'll get through it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I introduced you a little earlier as father of 4 because it's actually a bit unusual for people of, I guess, our generation to be having so many children, Liam.
Well, we're Catholic, right? So every time that we have children.
Just doing your Catholic duty, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Now, you don't agree with Golriz Garaman's bill to lower the voting age. Why is that?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the bill has multiple sort of aspects to it in terms of electoral reform. Some of them aren't really all that objectionable. There's no real reason why anyone should have a particularly strong view on when electors can switch between the Māori and the general roll, for example. But it does include very controversial, very unpopular provision that the voting age be lowered to the age of 16. It's part of a movement worldwide to try to advocate for a reduced voting age. Funnily enough, most of the people who are pushing this or who are in favour of a reduced voting age tend to be on the left. And as with most electoral reforms, there is a strong self-interest element in that. You would normally expect that most people who are 16 or 17, in favour of simplistic narratives, perhaps under particular influence from their teachers, would vote for the left. And so there is that aspect. Yeah, that's right, in a way. It's dreadfully unpopular. I think there have been two public polls on this question in the last year. One was by TVNZ, which found 85% of voters against the idea, and the other was by Curia, which had 88% against. So it's so unpopular. It's so unpopular that giving the vote to 16-year-olds is less popular than giving the right to vote to prisoners. So that's a measure of how unpopular it is. So it's not going to happen. It's also not
this government, I'm not sure. They're quite willing to do things that people don't like.
Well, the voting age is actually part of what's called entrenched legislation.
Right.
Under it's one of the sections on the Electoral Act, which requires a 75% majority of Parliament to pass. Right. So it's just not going to happen.
No, because some of the other parties are clearly just not going to support it, are they?
Oh, no. I mean, all the national parties on the record of being against it. I'm not sure about ACT, but you're not going to get 75%. You're just not. Especially not for a measure that's so unpopular with the public. But, I mean, having said all that, the fact that something's unpopular doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. Okay? And so, we can point to this and say, right, well, the common sense of New Zealanders is that they oppose this. But we wouldn't, for example, just accept that for another minority group that, was being denied the vote. So the question comes down to, is there a good reason why 16-year-olds shouldn't vote? And I think there is.
Okay, hit us with it.
Well, it's not what you might think, right? So
Okay.
the most common argument is that 16-year-olds sort of lack the life experience, and they, their brains haven't quite developed, and they're still learning, and that's all true. But we've never had sort of knowledge requirements or the requirements being particularly wide to vote, and we never had that. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, there are plenty of very stupid people who are over 16 who are entitled to vote. We don't, like you say, we don't do an IQ test or check that you've, worked a steady job for X amount of years or something like this before we let people. Yeah, so it is a flawed argument, I guess, to kind of say that.
Well, it's not a completely strong argument in that way. But what it comes down to for me is this: look. It's unfashionable to say it, and it drives people nuts whenever I say it, but we have an age of majority in this country, by default, of 18. Mm-hmm. In law, it's actually 20, but by default, it's sort of de facto 18. People under 18 years old of age are children. Mm-hmm. They are, right? So when we bring politics, when we make children a voting demographic, we bring politics into childhood, right? And so there's all sorts of flow-on effects from that. So if you have the right to vote, you have the right to receive information, okay? So that means that schools will become ground zero for political battles, right? So at the moment, there's not much point in political campaigns trying to get into schools, trying to get at kids through school.
Well, I would argue that they do, because that it sets them up for a few years' time when they are allowed to vote. I actually think schools are getting increasingly more political.
They are, but in an election year, when you're a political party looking to expend every last resource to try and win that election, and elections have short-term focus, you're not going to waste it on people who can't vote.
Yeah.
You're just not, But that all changes once you bring schools into the equation, right? 16-year-olds into the equation. So you have, at the moment, we all know as parents, we have teachers who say things that annoys us because it's vaguely political or everything like that, or it sort of influence them. But, we don't tend to make a mountain out of it because we see it as a bit of a molehill. But once those kids are sort of in an electoral constituency, that changes.
Yeah, they're fair game.
And so, yeah, they're fair game. So it means that you'll have political parties starting to target 16, 17-year-olds with, videos and, campaigns tailored for them, which means, that they become ground zero in disinformation war as well. And it's just this huge infringement on the rights of parents to sort of guide and protect their children from the world until they've reached the age of 18 and recognise that they're an adult. So whenever you talk to people who are really in favour of voting age, quite frequently what they'll say is, we need to do this to revitalise our democracy, to get kids engaged, so they get in the habit of voting and they continue all their voting patterns for the rest of their life. But that's actually putting an adult concern, co-opting children, bringing children along to use for an adult purpose, because you as an adult want to have higher turnout or more energised democracy.
Or it's being driven by a small group of very precocious young people who are already politically engaged, and it ignores the fact that most children of that age are actually probably more concerned with their sport on the weekend, whatever their friends are doing, sneaking alcohol, something like that, They're kind of doing young people things, and you have a small group of, as I say, probably quite precocious young people who are very engaged, demanding on their behalf. And you're right, it introduces a level of politicism to the lives of young people. And I have to say, the world's not easy at the moment, and I think we should be letting our young people have a childhood and letting them just leave the kind of dirty aspect of politics to adults, I guess.
We're both in our 30s, right? Andy?
Yeah.
I think you're in your 30s, right?
Just.
So we know how quickly, you look back on childhood, how quickly it goes.
Yeah.
It's actually we will have the risk. I was one of those annoying nerds who was really into politics, right?
I was as well.
Got to get away from we've got to get away from this American idea that every election is like this crucial make or break for the country. You know, I would have liked to have voted in 16 or 17, but maybe. But you know what? I voted in 6 general elections since. I've got voting in elections every 3 years for the rest of my life. You know, the country, politics can wait. And if I look back, I think, you know, the things that I really loved about my late teenage years, it wasn't, you know, being a wannabe junior MP or, you know, getting into youth parliament or anything like that. It was hanging out with my mates. It was playing rugby, as I say. It was trying to sneak alcohol to parties. It was having crushes on girls. Those sorts of things, you know, and they're really precious, and they're only part of your life for a short amount of time. Yeah. And just in the same way that it's sort of it's just so inappropriate the way that we sort of try to scare children with adult concerns. You know, we try to instill fear in them about climate change. And you know,
I absolutely agree with you on that. I think it is an absolute travesty, the amount of fear we have put into children about that. You know, it is a concern, something that adults should be worried about, but the fact that children are marching because they think that the world's ending in 12 years is, I think it's a crime. You're giving them chronic anxiety.
Yeah, and it's just you're using them, you know, like you're co-opting them into your movement in this time of their life, which is fleeting, which is not going to be there forever, of where they can be innocent and carefree and not have to be concerned about the adult cares of the world. And so if we just make one last point, when we're up against these precocious young people who talk about, they, you know, often will compare themselves to, you know, suffragettes or to people, you know, people of colour in the United States and everything like that, and they'll say, right, well, you know, how is it different to that? And the point is that it's wrong and hurtful and injurious to human dignity to deny the vote to somebody because of their sex or the colour of their skin, because those are immutable aspects of them. That's part of who they are, right, forever. You know, that's what's wrong about prejudice. But by definition, age isn't immutable. By definition, it's mutable. Everyone who is now a child will one day be an adult, you know, barring some tragedy. And so it's not the same thing at all. And so, you know, to me, looking at it, I think, look, you know, these kids are going to have the ability to vote for the rest of their lives. Let them be kids while they're kids.
I couldn't agree more, but just before you go, I think we might disagree on another aspect. I have always been a firm believer in everyone having the right to vote, and I do not think the vote should be taken off prisoners.
Oh, look, I'm not, you know, I'm not really passionate about that because I can see the argument both ways. I think, for me, look, the idea of stripping prisoners of the vote while they're in prison, I don't have a problem with that, because I think, look, if you think about all the civil liberties that you prize in your life, right? What are the most important civil liberties that you have? Is it the right to go and come as you please, to associate with who you want, or is it the right to have a mass vote once every 3 years? You know,
I take that point. I think it's just more symbolic in the case that I think we don't punish criminals hard enough in many cases, but I don't think we should unhuman them or uncitizen them. I think we should retain those rights that are symbolic, some would say, as a kind of, actually, these people have a interest in the future of the country, and hopefully they are going to be rehabilitated and return to society in a positive manner. Perhaps I get the feeling a lot of my listeners might be disagreeing with me on this one, but I take the point that it's probably the least of their worries when they can't leave a cell, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think this is one of those things where it's a genuine thing where reasonable people can have a different view, because there's a range of things. When you go into prison, you're stripped of your liberties. That's sort of the essence of what prison is. But as you say, not stripped of all your liberties, right? So we wouldn't say that a prisoner can't practice his or her religion to the extent that it's not inconsistent with their, you know, sort of confinement. So, you know, I think this is one of those things where there's a range of reasonable views on it, and I can certainly respect the view that prisoners, you know, enfranchising prisoners isn't the worst thing in the world. fact may be a good thing. I actually just don't have a strong opinion on it because to me, and maybe this is me showing, to me, the number of prisoners in this country is so small, that, about 10,000. It's not going to influence it in either way.
About 10,000 men and about 1,000 women, I think.
Yeah, so the stakes aren't, stakes aren't quite so high. So the idea of refractorising prisoners, I don't lose sleep over it for 1 second. But I can also see the logic of people who think that as a symbolic sort of stripping of liberty, it's a good idea. I can also see your view, which is say that we should be reintegrated into society. We should actually, have them engaged in the civic process, notwithstanding their confinement. So, sorry, I'm not going to introduce any contention to it, Annie.
I'm sure some of my listeners will be happy to give me a call later and tell me that I'm wrong. I hope they do. Love a good chat like that. The other aspect of it is the transparency of political donations. Do you think if this goes... This is obviously Golriz Garaman's bill that's come out of the biscuit tin. Now, if everyone's going to reject the age, is it a shame then that there is some perhaps good parts around transparency of donations, arguably around the prisoner stuff, depending on your view, because it's going to be put in with this age thing that's going to not go through, so it all doesn't go through?
Well, I'm not actually sure about that. Not all of it has to. Like the, this is real nerd stuff, and actually, I'm not the right nerd to be talking to. But there are when you're looking to amend entrenched legislation, there are sort of requirements about how it gets voted on, how it gets moved. So I believe that. If there's support for the rest of it, then it can proceed without the voting age.
So they could split it into different clauses and kind of vote on each one.
Or that's right. Or it depends on what the procedures. But I wouldn't be saying for sure that the voting age is poison pills for the bill as a whole. Having said that, I would have to reject the idea that more transparency around donations is necessarily a good thing. I actually don't agree with it.
All right, okay. What's the argument there?
Well, if you look at the United States, right, where they have varying laws by jurisdiction, and in some places you can look up and see who donated to what party, right, or to what proposition for a ballot initiative or referendum. And it just becomes a license for people to look up and harass people and try to get them fired.
True.
Things like that. A real concern. And, a point I always make is that if you go back to sort of donation secrecy laws, why were they sort of advocated for in the first place? And it's because of Jim Crow, right? Because in the American South, people who want to support the NAACP or support those causes found themselves being publicly shamed and harassed. And, we're not in a healthy culture where we can expose what people's political activities are and not expect them to be sort of shouted down, sort of harassed about it. And so, I think a better way to go, Annie, honestly, is you think, okay, there's some virtue in anonymity because it means that people can safely participate in politics without being attacked. We don't want people to be secretly influencing parties. That's true as well. So one way to do it, we have a sort of halfway way of doing it in New Zealand, is you make it compulsory to donate anonymously, right? So if you want to donate to a political party, you've got to donate through a blind trust.
I see. So the party itself doesn't know who you are either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And so I've written about this, and I'm happy to discuss it with Sense at some point. But what basically the way it works is that there are systems in place. You can set it up in a way so that even if donors tell political parties that they've donated to them, that it can't be verified, right? So there are ways to do that, and so that means that nobody can influence elections because nobody can confirm or verify that they've actually made the donation. People can claim to have made donations and not have made them, so they can't be trusted. But people can make those donations in peace without fear of being harassed or dare I say, cancelled for what they're trying to do.
I find myself thoroughly convinced by that argument, actually. So thank you for that. And thank you for discussing the other aspects of this voting age, voting rights bill, I guess. And it'll be very interesting to see how it is debated. I really hope you're right. And I think, as you say, 85 or 88% of the country will also hope you're right and that the voting age doesn't get lowered. Thanks for joining us, Liam.
My pleasure. Not going to happen.
Okay, we heard it here first, guys. Okay, so that was Liam here.